The theme of this session was labour and skill requirements for the decarbonisation and digitalisation of transport. And my contribution related to freight transport and logistics, simply asking what the implications are for human resources, if you like, of the efforts to currently decarbonise freight transport and logistics.
You mentioned the flood of Chinese electric vehicles that we're now expecting to come into Europe. I don't think the same would apply to trucks. Europe has a very strong truck manufacturing sector, which is currently making this transition from diesel vehicles to electric vehicles predominantly, I think very effectively. So I'm very hopeful that the European truck manufacturing industry will retain its very strong global position. Though the figure one often sees is you require only 1/6 of the labour to make an electric truck that you require to make a diesel truck. So there'll be the labour input, if you like, into truck manufacturing is going to reduce quite dramatically in the future.
Well, I've been an academic researcher in freight and logistics now for 44 years, a whole lifetime. I've been focusing on the environmental impact of freight transport now probably for about 25 years, and then probably since around 2006 I've been looking at decarbonisation. And to some extent that culminated in the publication of my Decarbonising Logistics book, which came out in 2018. So it's been a lifelong commitment really to this area of research. One encouraging trend, for example, is companies increasing their capability to measure and report carbon emissions, because we've always needed greater carbon transparency in this sector. And over the past 15 years that I've been researching this area, we've seen a lot of progress being made. We've seen a convergence, a harmonisation of the standards that companies use, the methodologies they use to measure emissions, and more companies are reporting those emissions. To some extent they're doing this under pressure from the shippers, from the users of freight service, who want to know from their carriers, what those carbon emissions are. And then very soon we're going to see strengthening regulatory pressure on freight and logistics companies to declare their emissions with the EU's Count Emissions EU initiative. So I think that's a positive development. Another development is just the increasing importance that shippers and the big logistics providers are making to cut their emissions. In the case of the shippers, many of them are working collaboratively these days, partly to rationalise their freight movements, but also to use the procurement process, the way they buy freight and logistics services, and in so doing attaching greater importance to the carbon intensity of the operations. I think that's a very encouraging trend, which through time will deliver deeper cuts in emission levels.